Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Hua. It is another beautiful day here, and I am here to read to you part 2 of Dellanna. The first part can be found in my videos below. This is a story written in shifting character point of view, with the character's name being said before the story begins. I hope that you enjoy.
Without love in your heart, without love by your side, without love playing part, tell me what you do, tell me what you do. Without love in your heart.
Dellanna. I watched him leave the flower shop, and my inside cringed. This man, who I thought was the most handsome man alive, was fighting demons worse than me. I felt sorry for him, really, even though I loathed the idea of someone thinking that way of me. But the look of pure pity in his eyes as he laid out his heart to me made me realize looks were deceiving. I had watched as his eyes turned sour at the mention of his ex-lover, and I knew exactly how he felt. I knew what it was like to not be enough for someone. He was bitter and battling a loss deeper than I imagined. His voice had gotten flat as he began to describe to me how he only did everything for her and how everything to her meant nothing. My feelings for him were beginning to take shape and molding into something frightening. At first, it was just a crush because his face was handsome and he carried an aurora about him that made it special. But as I learned about who he was, how deeply tortured he was by the loss of a woman, I came to the sudden realization that I could not allow myself to fall in love with such a man. He held too much damage, and I would be the rebound to get over someone if I should choose to want him. Did I even see the girl that he lost? I held nothing when it came to her. She was exactly what I described to my aunt. Long legs, big boobs, blonde, and a body like a model. I was nothing in comparison. So when he made a promise to come back to check up on me, I told him to not come back because I did not need to be pampered by a guilty conscience. My jaw was pounding as I poured out 2 painkillers into my palm and swallowed them. My aunt came around the corner of the break room, and her eyes told me everything I already knew. Don't worry, Aunt Kate, he's not going to come back. Oh, him not coming back is not what I'm worried about, honey. What scares me is that right now, that little skin between your shoulder blades is beginning to itch, and you're going to need someone to scratch it soon. I'm afraid I might know who he might be. I laughed. Really, Aunt Kate, you have no trust in me? It's not you I don't trust, sweetheart. It's him and what he can do to make you lose trust in yourself. What my aunt said was like a spell on me as I laid in my room later that night with a pounding jaw. I knew she was right. I knew that in some sort of a way, if he came on strong, I wouldn't be able to resist him. That was my problem. I was weak when it came to the heart, and if someone pleaded enough, I caved. That's how I got into trouble with Rick, and how I ended up being solo. I shut my eyes and tried to close my mind, but it was so loud. Everything was so loud, and as much as I tried to enter silence, I knew my mind was too awake to be shut off. This was going to be a problem, and as I feared, my heart was already trembling as I thought about those dark eyes that poured into mine. I woke the next morning with a swollen cheek, and I called in to my aunt telling her that I was not fit to work today. She understood and said she would stop by at noon to check up on me. As I showered under hot water, letting it slide down my aching body, my mind flashed back to yesterday. Did it really happen? It did, and the pain throbbing in my jaw was proof enough that I had spent a morning trapped between a quarrel of ex-lovers. I dressed in my gray sweatpants and oversized black sweater. There were my comfort items to wear when I felt like the world had crashed down on me. I was in too much pain to care that I didn't even rinse all the conditioner from my hair and that my walls needed tending. With this pain pulsing, I was sure I wouldn't get to my walls until another week from now. I sat down on the couch and stared at the unfinished project I put off for the entire summer. It was winter, and I decided to do it on a whim. How smart I truly was. No matter how much I stared at the walls, I knew that they couldn't finish the job by itself. If I put it off today, tomorrow would be the same. Groaning, I got up and went to change into my overalls. At noon, I heard the door open and I saw my aunt walk in, shaking snow off of her hat. Odd, I was so busy working I didn't even glance outside. And when I did, sure enough, snow was falling lightly. I got off the ladder as she removed her boots. She stared at me and then the mess before us. I came expecting to find you in bed from your injury, not redoing your living room walls, she said. Well, I figured I might as well because I had put it off all summer long. As if she read my mind, she replied, "How smart." I rolled my eyes and put my tools down. "Are you busy there today?" She unzipped her coat and hung it over the couch. She laughed, and then she looked up at me with her blue eyes. "One guess as to who came in today." I froze, and she nodded, knowing I'd already guessed who it was. "I thought I told him to stay away." "Oh, come on. When has men ever listened to women?" "He came in demanding to know where you lived because he was so concerned about you," she mocked. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to crawl where the sun don't shine." I felt for a chair, and finally my fingers found the couch behind me. I sat down and my heart raced. I knew I looked flushed, and the look on my aunt's face told me that everything she had predicted was true. She took a deep breath. Hell was about to begin.
When I think about the way we used to be, when I think about the things you took from me, I know that
Connor, the aunt, blew me off. She told me to crawl where the sun don't shine. Where the hell is that anyway? Oh, right. Hell. Duh. That's the answer right there. I didn't mean to come back around, but the idea of her being punished because of me just didn't sit right. I also had a huge problem with people staying mad at me. And Dellanna was really mad at me. I just had to make it right. I stayed awake last night wondering what I could do to alter her thoughts of me. Yesterday, I had laid my heart out on the table, explaining why I had done what I did. I told her about Sheila, the new boyfriend, and then I had to stop and wonder why. I was never one to open up to strangers, and yet there I was, bearing my soul to a spectacle-wearing girl who I didn't even know. Maybe this was why people went to therapy. It was a stranger instead of someone judging them. The problem was that Dellanna wasn't really a stranger, and she judged me. It was a bad combination that left me unraveling in my thoughts. I found myself waiting for the aunt to leave the shop, hoping she'd go to Dellanna's house, and I thanked my lucky stars because she did. She walked the 2 blocks east and came upon a small cottage house. She had used a key, I noticed, and let herself in. I didn't really know if it was her house or not until the door opened again and she walked her aunt out. I saw that the bruise on her jaw was now an ugly black and blue. She wore those god-awful overalls that were 2 sizes too big for her. She hugged her aunt, and I waited for the older woman to disappear down the block before I got out to knock. "Did you forget something?" I heard her voice asking as she pulled the door open. The smile on her face disappeared when she saw that it was me. She was going to slam the door in my face. I knew it, and when she did, I caught it with my foot. She surprised me by stomping on my foot, and I yelped as I removed it. The door slammed in my face, and my toe throbbed as I jumped like an idiot. The door opened again, and she came out with flared nostrils. "How do you know where I live?" she snapped. "I followed your aunt." She shook her head. "You're so evil. What are you doing here?" "I just came to check up on you. Is that so bad?" "I told you to stay away. I don't need your drama anywhere near me. I already got a good kick out of it, and I'm not enjoying the aftermath." I stole a look inside and realized she was redoing her walls. She followed my gaze and closed her door to keep me from peeking inside. "You look well. That's all I wanted to make sure of. I guess I'll take my leave now before you cripple me." She laughed. Oh, funny. At least I didn't kick you in the face. I had to give her that one. I just shook my head and walked off. I heard the door slam again, and I got into my car. As I turned on my car, I saw the curtain move and saw her glance out for a split second before letting the curtain fall back into place. I smiled, knowing she was there, watching me like a thief. I found myself in front of Sheila's house. Again. I could see that she was alone. The black Ford pickup wasn't anywhere in sight. I walked up to the door and knocked. It was a moment before she opened. She was dolled up, wearing too much makeup than I remembered, and her hair had gotten longer, if that was possible. She wore very tight jeans and a black sleeve blouse that made her curves scream. I wasn't used to this new person before me. "What are you doing here?" she asked with an irritated tone. My throat burned with jealousy, knowing she was heading out to meet him. "You look different." She smiled. This is the look of a very satisfied woman when she has a good man. I never had this look with you because you never made me happy. Jealousy turned to anger quick, and I felt my heart throb. I never made you happy? How is it that I never made you happy? I busted my ass off for you, working long hours so I could buy you everything you wanted. If anything, your demands were what made me work the long hours. She crossed her arms, making her cleavage appear bigger. No, Connor, you don't understand. You never made me happy at any point in our relationship. You were lousy as a lover, you were lousy in conversation, and you were lousy in keeping me. It was your fault you didn't see it coming. My breath came out uneven as she smiled. I fought to keep my hands at my side. She noticed my fingers shaking, and she stepped forward, closing the distance between us. I could smell the new perfume she wore. It turned me off. She reached up with red painted nails and raked my cheek. You want to know something, Connor? He makes me happier than you ever did, and he will be everything you wish you could be, she whispered. I heard the sound of tires, and I knew he was there to pick her up. She smiled as I stepped away from her. I caught sight of him getting out of the truck. He glared at me with his eyes, and I flipped him the bird. As I walked back to my car, I made the mistake of turning around. She caught my eyes, and then grabbed her new beau by the neck and began making out with him. Dellanna. It was after midnight before I was able to shower and sleep. When the alarm woke me up, I was dead tired, but I got up and showered. I needed to finish the walls, but I also needed money. I opted for money. I dressed and walked the 2 blocks to the flower shop. My aunt was already in, checking off orders with the delivery company from wholesale. I ignored everyone who was around me and made my way into the back room, where I removed my coat. I used what little makeup I had to cover up my bruise as best as I could. As my aunt took flower orders, I opened the front door and began setting up. The door opened, and I prayed it wasn't Connor. I let out a breath of relief when an older woman came in. I helped attend to her needs, even though I didn't want to. After she left, I walked to the back room where the wholesale delivery guys were just leaving. My aunt flipped me a thumbs up as she raced to the front door. I smiled and continued to package what was delivered into the fridge. I decided to take a walk back home during lunch. I needed some fresh air. The weather was warm today, surprising me because the sun wasn't anywhere in sight. As I reached my front door, I heard my grumpy neighbor playing loud music. I rolled my eyes and I took my key out to unlock the door. He came out wearing jeans and a black leather jacket. He hadn't shaved in a few days and was sporting a beard. His eyes were bloodshot red, and he really could use a bath. He stopped to stare at me, and I pushed my door open. I could hear his music blaring through his open windows. Who the hell opened their windows in the middle of winter? I walked to warm the can of soup I had in my cupboard when I heard the doorbell ring. I shut off the stove and walked to open it, only to find Connor standing there with a dreary look in his eyes. He had shaved and was beginning to lose the irritation around his lips. He looked rested, but I could still see the sourness behind his eyes. He stood there with his hands inside his pockets. A gray scarf decorated his neck, and the breath that escaped his lips told me how cold it actually was. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He gestured to his left. "I came to visit my brother." Frowning, I stuck my head out to see my grumpy neighbor making his way into the house, and then I turned to Connor. "That's your brother?" "Yes, why do you ask?" "It's hard to believe, seeing as how he's so rude, and you at least try to remember about manners." A small smile escaped his lips. "Gee, thanks. That should make my mother proud." "That doesn't answer my question as to why you're at my doorstep." She sighed deeply. "Look, I know that I've said I'm sorry about 1,000,000 times, and I still feel bad about it. I just don't want you to think that I do this all the time. I really am a decent man, and like you said, I do know my manners. I have a big problem with people being mad at me. It just doesn't sit right with me." I laughed. "Okay, first, you've only said you're sorry about 10 times. I'm sure you feel bad about it, and judging from your brother, who has been my neighbor for the past 6 years and is grumpy to everyone he meets, I guess I can label you as decent. And your problem about not liking others being mad at you is none of my business, and if I am mad at you, you'll just take it all together and allow it to brew." He opened and shut his mouth as if he was ready to argue, but no words came out. He stood there staring at me, and then suddenly he laughed. It was the least thing that I expected, and it threw me off guard. He roared with laughter, and I found I liked his sound. It was jolly, and his eyes crinkled at the edge, making him look like the decent man that he described himself to be. His eyes, the brightness that I adored, returned, and I felt my chest panic with restriction of breath. When he stopped laughing, he wiped his eyes with the pads of his thumb. "Oh, gee, thanks. I really needed that laugh." I smiled. "I'm happy to provide. My hours are Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. Now please leave so that I can finish my lunch and get back to work." "Don't you own a car?" "What's it to you?" He shrugged. "I don't know. I was just curious. My brother says you walk to work every day." My brows creased together and I almost laughed. "Your brother told you that? He watches me that closely." "Apparently." And here I thought he wasn't human. "Surprise, surprise," Connor said with a smile. Connor. I watched as my brother pushed the empty pizza boxes off the table and onto the floor, where more empty Chinese boxes were already filling the room. The house smelled of rust and something unpleasant. I couldn't believe he took it this serious, this undercover job of his. He had stopped shaving, and somewhere in between, I swore he stopped taking a shower. He was now looking exactly like a bum because that was who he was supposed to be. My brother Jason was younger than me by 5 years, but he was a lot more fit and taller than I was. He was an undercover cop and ex-Marine who loved his job. All I knew about this new work was that he was supposed to play a very grumpy and bum-looking man. Well, he sure had his neighbors fooled and hating him. When I spoke to Dellanna, she sure didn't hide the fact that she despised him. You know, when you're inside the house, you can at least keep the house clean. No one is coming inside, isn't this taking it a little bit too far? I said. Jason looked up at me and laughed. "Yeah, I did that for the first year I lived here. Then one of the neighbor's kids managed to break into my house and saw how clean and lively I lived. I had to take extra precautions to not let that happen again." "When was the last time you showered?" He laughed. "Look, don't let this get-up distract you from who I really am. I'm just playing a part in my job. I've been successful so far, and hopefully I can wrap it up." "Right, and move so your neighbors can finally be rid of you. You know they all hate you." Jason shrugged. "I need to do a job, and my job is hard to do when people try to be friendly. I can't get anyone involved, so I have to be mean. It works. Everyone leaves me alone. I can spy on them easily, like that neighbor lady you were just talking to." "What do you know about her?" Jason smiled and leaned back in his couch. "Caught your interest, didn't you?" "No. Have you seen the way she dressed? It's like a clash between a grandmother and a grieving aunt. I don't know which is worse. I just feel sorry for her," I said. My brother laughed, and then he leaned forward. He shook his head in disbelief. He narrowed his gaze, and this someone got me interested. "You want to know what she really looks like?" I felt my stomach drop. "Have you been looking in on her?" "Hard not to." when she walks around the house dressed in what she calls PJs, when she thinks everyone isn't looking. Without the glasses, her eyes shine brighter than anything I've ever seen. She has this thing where she does when she's nervous. She takes her hair and she twirls it around her fingers. She's wound tight, but I think that's because she's been hurt. Trust me, I know woman, and that woman has been left picking up the pieces. She hides beneath those god-ugly clothes only because she's shy. But if you remove each piece, god damn, she's God's perfect creation. Listening to him talk about her made me uncomfortable and a little bit jealous. I wasn't sure why. I didn't know why it bothered me either that my brother saw what I already knew was beneath it. I tried not to give away my emotions in my eyes, but being a cop, my brother saw right through me. But knowing how I'd react, he kept quiet. He only stared, and the look in his eyes said it all. I was beginning to not like what woman in god-ugly clothes and glasses did to me. I woke to the sound of my buzzer ringing loud and clearly, irritating me. Now I knew why the people who invented these sounds chose to compose them in a way that made you want to shut it off immediately. My head was aching and I was dead tired. I showered and dressed all in black aside from my red tie. I gathered my belongings and hopped into my car. When I arrived at work, I found my colleagues smiling at me from my previous win to design the building. Today, I smiled at them and decided I needed to stop being an asshole because if I lost the respect of the people I worked with, I'd be screwed. I made it into my office, and as if on cue, Joe came in wearing an olive suit. He shut the door and clapped his hands together. "How are you doing?" he asked. I looked at him and flipped him the bird. "That great, huh? Wow. I guess I'll be spending a lot of late nights here. Hey, when you're ready, you'll need to start picking team members for your gig. Big boss wants to know, and he wants to meet with you on team selection before noon." "Don't fret about it, Joe. You know you'll be on the team." He smiled and left as I sat down and rubbed my temples. There was a 3-inch thick folder sitting on my desk, and I knew I was already behind. I'd pitched this gig hoping I'd win because the commission was huge. I wanted to make partner, and if I could nail this, I knew I would have my name up there with the big boys. I picked up the folder and made my way to the end of the hall where my boss's office was. I knocked and entered. Frank Giles was just hanging up the phone as I entered and closed the door. He was a short, chubby man with little hair and these pale blue eyes that seemed to sink into your soul if you stared too long. He never wore suits to work. Instead, he wore jeans and flannel. I wondered why he made it a policy that we had to wear suits when he didn't practice what he preached. "Connor, just the man I wanted to see," Frank said as he took a drink from his coffee cup. By the look on his face, I knew that coffee was cold and bitter. I sat down and dropped the folder on the desk. "You wanted a team selection." "Yeah, and no, you can't have Joe." I frowned. "Why not? I always have Joe. He's my right-hand man." Frank shook his head. "Not this time." "Didn't you hear?" Shrugging, I replied, "No. What did I miss?" Frank leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. "I'm going to have to let him go. He's causing way too much headache, and each time I have to clean up his mess, I lose money." I moved closer to the edge of my seat. "Wait, what did he do?" "The woman he's dating is the daughter of the owner of my biggest account I'm trying to land." "You mean Tyler's manufacturer?" "Yes. He just broke up with her and began dating her best friend. Last night, Tyler called me at midnight when his daughter tried to shove a bottle of pills down her throat. Luckily, she was saved in time and will be okay. But you can guess that Tyler wasn't too impressed when he learned who Joe was working for." "Oh, man. Did he threaten you?" "He didn't have to. I know what I have to do. I've been working on this deal for 6 years, and because he can't keep his damn pants zipped, it's going to cost me a $4 million contract. I'd rather lose him." I blew out hot air. "Frank, you can't cut him. He'll be devastated. He lives on this job. You know you need him." Frank took another drink and frowned. He made an unpleasant noise this time and shook his head. No. I can't afford to lose this contract. Joe, I can easily replace. But this contract, if I lose it, it goes to Weaver." Shit, I muttered. Weaver was our #1 competitor, and if we lost it to Weaver, all our other contracts would soon merge over. Frank, this is going to kill Joe. You know that, don't you? He didn't give me a choice. Pick your team. I felt my heavy feet drag itself to my office, and as I expected, I saw Joe sitting in my chair already twirling as if he owned the building. The look on his face told me he had no shame in what he'd done. As soon as I closed the door, he took one look at me and he stopped the chair, the happiness fading. Why do you look like shit? He asked. Why can't you keep your goddamn pants zipped? I snapped. What? For crying out loud, Joe. Tyler's daughter? You were dating Tyler's daughter and you didn't even tell me it was her. Now you move on to her best friend and she ends up in the ER. He shot out of the chair. I can't help it, Connor. I'm in love. If I had $1 for every time I heard that line from you, I'd die a rich man. You don't know what love is. Oh, and you do. A man who is married to his work so much that his own woman leaves him. This isn't about me, Joe. This is about you and how you're going to be jobless because Frank had to clean up after your mess. He won't let me have you on the team. He's cutting you out. He's had enough. Joe's face paled. It's not even that serious. Not that serious? Wake up, Joe. She took a bottle of pills to end her life. Nothing gets more serious than that, buddy. Joe raked a hand through his hair and sat back down. Look, as much as I love Denise, I just couldn't imagine myself being with her for the rest of my life. And then I saw Rachel and everything changed. I shook my head. Joe, you have to stop hurting women. You'll end up alone one day. Thank you for tuning in to part 2 of Dellanna. Part 3 will be up shortly for your enjoyment.